Hey guys, Coach Weston here with Good Lift Performance. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about accessories for powerlifting, my philosophy on accessories, and how I use them in my own programming. I alluded to this in my previous vlog video, and if you like that video, I have a new one coming out relatively soon, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, so let's just dive right into the topic. But before we do, make sure if you like the video to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button to stay up to date when I upload new videos. And also, if you like the merch, because it's sick. Everyone who's been buying it has been loving it. If you like the merch, use the link down below to grab yourself some Good Lift apparel. All right, let's get into the topic of the day. So first, let's talk about what are accessories. Because I did make a video a while back called Variations in Powerlifting. And so that might sound similar. And so I want to make sure we make the distinction of what is an accessory. So for me, and at least the way I program, and I know the way a lot of people program it, variations are going to be still a barbell movement. It's going to be a variation of our competition lift, versus accessories are going to be things that are not the barbell lift. So a lot of times it's going to be either dumbbells or machines or cables. Those are going to be our big three. And they don't necessarily need to replicate the movement of the squat, bench, or deadlift, but oftentimes they're just working the muscle, because the power lifts aren't always the greatest in terms of hypertrophy for the individual muscles that it works. Because of the fact that some muscles work through a different action and range of motion than the competition lifts do. So while you will get a good general base of hypertrophy from the competition lifts, it doesn't cover everything, and it leaves a lot to be desired that we can then cover in our program with accessories, kind of fill in the gaps, cross our T's, dot our I's, if you will. So that's why we want to use accessories. It's so that we can kind of cover the gap of what the main lifts don't cover, as well as it has some additional benefits that I'll get into. And so with accessories, it also comes into what I like to call long-term athletic development. And so for powerlifting, our goal is always to get stronger, but long-term, the way we increase our ceiling of how strong we can get is by getting more muscular. The more muscular a person is, the more potential they have for producing force. And so they have a potential for being stronger. If you compare two athletes in a weight class and one is significantly more muscular than the other one, the one who is more muscular is generally going to have a higher strength potential than the one that is less muscular. And so we want to make sure that even though our primary goal is getting stronger, that we're always trying to get more muscular as well, because that will increase our ability to get stronger. And with that being said, while strength is mostly a nervous system adaptation, hypertrophy is more of a physical adaptation where the tissue literally gets bigger, right? And so we have to understand that you can only synthesize so much tissue at a time and so fast. And so versus like with your powerlifting training, you can change the rate of your progress depending on how much you're training and the dosage of that. Versus with hypertrophy, you can only do so much and you're only going to get so much out of it. Like you can increase your threshold, increase the amount of work past the threshold needed to make progress, and you're not going to make that much more progress. Like it's not like powerlifting. Bryce Lewis said this really well in one of his videos, where you can double down on your powerlifting training, your strength training to get stronger quicker, but you can't really double down on hypertrophy training. Hypertrophy is going to progress at the rate it's going to progress. And so we have to respect that and make sure that we are training for hypertrophy to some degree pretty much year round. Even when we're getting ready for competition, we still want to be hitting our accessories, maybe not as hard for the last 4, maybe 8-ish weeks, but we're still pushing accessories hard, because it's something that if we don't push it during a specific period of time, that's just lost time. Versus in powerlifting, with our strength focused work, we can make up that lost ground, if that makes sense. So we always want to be working on our hypertrophy for our long-term development, so we can set ourselves up to be as strong as possible. And with that, another important part of at least my philosophy when it comes to programming is I like to train the body in a more holistic fashion. This does come from my collegiate strength and conditioning background, where we would have to train the athletes in every range of motion, because you never know what they're going to experience on the field. While in powerlifting, we know exactly what we're going to experience on the platform. What that can lead to is a hyper focus on just squat, bench, and deadlift, and in the things that make us better at those. And we can neglect some of the other muscle groups that keep you healthy and that you use more in your everyday life. An important example of that might be like your shoulders, where shoulders aren't really directly a part of most powerlifting programs, right? It's it's a lot of chest and triceps, and then the shoulders might get neglected a little bit. And so in my philosophy, I like to do direct shoulder work or even like direct bicep work, where we don't think like, oh, well, the bicep doesn't really get involved too much. But if you are a mixed grip deadlifter, your bicep does work isometrically to help like stabilize your elbow while you're holding the weight. And if it's untrained, that can become a weak link, where even on the bench press, where our tricep gets so strong and our bicep is severely weaker than the tricep, that could potentially cause some elbow pain or other dysfunction that show up later down the road. It's not always going to happen if you neglect those areas, but has an increased risk of that happening. So in my experience, I like to train the body holistically. I like to train every muscle group to some degree. It may not get the same amount of attention that your chest, your triceps, and your quads, your hamstrings and glutes might get, but still focusing on training things like your shoulders, your biceps, maybe your calf, stuff like that, I think can still be very important, and also just helping you have a good physique, because who doesn't want to look like they actually train, right? So those are probably my two big components of my philosophy when it comes to programming accessories. Is one, making sure we're paying attention to our long-term potential and we're always working on getting more jacked. And number two is training the body holistically, so that we can keep those other small muscles that don't get trained as much healthy and strong, so they don't become the weak link, that they can keep up relative to what they need to be able to do. So when talking about how to use the accessories in the program, there's two primary ways we're going to do that. One is going to be just, as kind of we've been talking about, it's just hypertrophy, right? Doing enough work so that we can get the muscle bigger, so that it becomes more resilient, as well as it can have more potential for producing more force. And so we want to do that not only on our muscles that are used in the primary lifts, like our chest, triceps, and quads, glutes and hamstrings, but also for things like our biceps and shoulders, stuff like that. But it can also be an extension of the main lift volume. And so what I mean by that is, let's say we're squatting, like say twice a week, and our lower back is taxed. We really don't want to do more lower back, like more squat volume, because it's going to be more taxing and then might bleed into our deadlift. But our legs could still handle more work, because the squat more evenly distributes the load over the lower body, but that might leave our quads undertrained, because we can handle more volume in our quads. So this is where we can use something like a leg press or quad dominant accessory to kind of fill in that gap of, all right, we can now use this accessory to push your quadricep volume, so that now that you can give your quads more stimulus without taxing the rest of your body, which can help bring up your squat. And so in a way, it can become squat volume, even though it doesn't count, like you wouldn't track it as squat volume. It almost in a way becomes additional volume. Or maybe they're not really built to squat, right? So they can only handle so much squat volume, and let's say it's not a ton, but they need more volume in order to progress their squat. Well, we can use something like a belt squat, for example. A belt squat is going to be less fatiguing on the back, and it's going to load the quads a little bit more. And so we can use a variation like belt squat to get more specific leg volume, like quadricep volume in, that will allow us to push our competition squat up, our main squat up, without having to do more squat volume, because that squat, we would get more beat up from doing squat volume, versus doing something like a belt squat could get us the relative same amount of progress, but not as fatiguing. And so that's where we can use accessories as sort of additional volume when we can't get enough volume on the main lifts to drive adaptation, which is one of the main reasons we use a variation, but we can also do that with an accessory. So thinking about things like the belt squat or the leg press, not only as hypertrophy of getting the quadriceps bigger, but also it can be used as additional volume. Same thing with like the RDL and the deadlift, right? We can use the RDL to hypertrophy the glutes and the hamstrings, which will help in the deadlift, but we can also use it as additional pulling volume. Or something like, let's say, a dip for the upper body, where dips are great for general upper body hypertrophy, kind of hits the chest, shoulders, and triceps very well, but it can also be used as sort of pseudo bench volume to help increase overall workload in the bench press, and help drive that up without having to do more bench press. So it can be both in that regard. And so it's important to understand, are we doing this exercise just for general hypertrophy? So like a counterexample would be in the bench press doing like a cable fly. A cable fly really isn't going to add much additional volume to the bench press to drive that up, but it can make the pecs bigger by isolating just the pecs. And so that can help with future hypertrophy. It's also not that fatiguing, so you can know how that's going. You factor that in versus like a dip, where a dip might have similar hypertrophy for the chest, but now it's more fatiguing, but it might also drive up the bench more. So that the dip might have more of that additional volume aspect to it versus something like a cable fly or like a leg extension will just be more of that pure hypertrophy, easier to recover from aspect and not as much additional volume. So we have to understand when we're using these accessories, how are they playing with inside of the program? And then related to that as well is I'm going down a rabbit hole in this episode. Every time I come up with a topic, I just keep going into like a deeper topic related to it. So hopefully this is making sense and that everyone's following through here. The next topic is based off of that is volume. Like how much volume should we do on these accessories, right? And so there's kind of two different camps. It's I wouldn't call it minimum effective dose camp, but it's more of the let's do less and try to get more out of less, versus there's the people who will just load you up on volume and really try to push accessories. And so generally I'm going to fall into the camp of the more is generally less, especially in powerlifting training, where we're almost always doing our accessories after our main lift, right? So mentally and physically, we're going to be a little fatigued going into these accessories. And if you have too much volume on these accessories, it can be hard to really focus and give your best intent, because on the main lifts, we're talking about like strength development. It's a lot about adapting how much volume and intensity you're doing. But when it comes to hypertrophy, it's about mechanical tension. And if you aren't creating a lot of mechanical tension, then you can do sets until the cows come home, but they're not going to be very effective. And so making sure that you can put a lot of attention and effort into the sets you are doing to create a lot of mechanical tension, a lot of tension in the muscle is very, very important. And so I'm generally a big believer in let's do less sets, but let's make them really, really good sets. You don't really need to overdo it. Like the most I usually write for in terms of working sets is like 4, and that's like actually pretty high. Normally it's like 2 to 3, because 2 to 3 really gives you the opportunity to like focus in and dial in and give your best effort for those. A lot of times it's something like a 7, 8, 9, where like, hey, the first 2 sets are kind of you're getting your feet wet with it. Get an idea of where your weight needs to be, and that last set you can really push it. Or if you're just doing 2 sets, right, it can be your first one is not really a warm-up set, but it's hey, let me find a good weight for this one set that I'm going to push really hard. You will generally get more out of doing less and pushing the less sets you do harder, because you will be able to put more intention and effort into those. And also with that being said, also when you're looking at how many accessories you're doing in a day, you don't want to have to do like a laundry exercises, especially because it takes a long time to rotate through them. Even if you're supersetting, it can take a long time to do, and then mentally it's draining, and you can't focus as much on all those exercises if you have a lot to do. So just picking a few and really putting your best effort and attention into those few accessories is, in my opinion, the best way to go about that, because that way you are doing a lot of high quality work and you're not just doing junk volume for the sake of junk volume. If you're to the point where you are doing exercises and you just cannot concentrate, like you're so tired it's at the end of the session, it might be best just to put that work in a separate spot during the week, so you can give more time and attention to that exercise. So just throwing it at the end of the week and just doing a laundry list of accessories. And speaking of like being too tired to do something, like a common mistake I see with accessories is people who will write out these like, oh, there's like all these accessories to do, and then let's say they're too tired on one day to do them, like, oh, I just skipped them, like I didn't have the time and energy to do them. One, that just shows me that you're doing too much. And number 2, it shows that your program isn't intentional, where if you feel that it's okay to miss your cable chest fly, then you don't understand how much you're doing in terms of your chest volume, and you don't know how much you need in order to progress. You're just doing it for the sake of doing it because you think you should be doing it. So when you're writing your accessories, everything should be very intentional with how much you're doing, in terms of how much you need to progress, how much, like what day you're doing on it, how fatiguing it is, how that's going to bleed into your main lifts, and it needs to be very intentional. A lot of people just slap on accessories for the sake of doing accessories, but they should be taken as intentionally as your main lift, because it is still physical stress that you have to recover from. So if we're going to do the effort of, if we're going through the effort of writing it on the program and wanting our athletes to do this, or if you're putting this in the program, you should know why you're doing it, how much you should be doing of it, and where it needs to go inside of your program. In terms of like repetition ranges, normally the highest I'll ever go is like 15 reps. And that's usually kind of like at the beginning of a block, especially on some smaller stuff like leg extension, triceps, shoulder raises, bicep curl, stuff like that. Oftentimes for bigger things like dips or pull-ups or belt squat, I might go up to 15, but I don't go higher than 15. And so I think it's also important that you'll hear people say, treat your accessories like you're a bodybuilder and go ham on those. And while, yes, I do agree, like we need to put a lot of attention and effort into our accessories, there's a difference in hypertrophy for powerlifting than for bodybuilding. Bodybuilding, you're trying to hypertrophy every type of muscle fiber, and in powerlifting, you don't necessarily need to hypertrophy those like slower twitch fibers because those aren't going to really be contributing. Like you don't need to be doing sets of 20 to 30 that you might see bodybuilders do because we don't need to hypertrophy those slower twitch fibers. And so making sure that we're not running these like ridiculous hard, like crazy burnout type workouts of like doing 30 reps of something because it looks cool, right? Like we have to keep the goal and make sure we're hypertrophying the right fibers that we want to. So generally 15 is the highest I'll go, and then as low as 6 sometimes on some accessories, like something like an RDL or a dip, I might go as low as 6, especially towards the close to a meet on specifically something like an RDL or a dip that might be contributing volume to the main lift, right? And then within that, when it comes to progressing accessories, they're not going to progress as fast generally as our main lift. They're smaller muscle groups, right? And it's less muscle groups working together. You're isolating muscle groups a lot of the time. And so you're not going to necessarily be able to always progress those on a weekly basis. So you can do things like work with inside of a range of, hey, pick a weight that you can do for 12 and then try to, let's say you're doing 3 sets of 12 and then next week do 3 sets of 13 and then 14 and then 15, or maybe you're just trying to progress one set at a time. So like 1 13 and then 2 12s and then next week 2 13s and then 1 12. That's a great way to make progress there. Or you can do the opposite where you're starting off the block in the higher end of the range, and then as you just every week you try to add a little bit of weight to that accessory, and then you're okay if the rep drops down. Let's say you're in 12 to 10, right? So let's say you start off, you can do 12 reps for the first couple weeks and then it's 11 and then maybe 10 on the last week, or maybe 10 for the last 2 weeks, right? Something like that can also work really well. Accessories won't always progress at the same rate. It might take a couple weeks to progress, but we can build in ways to still make progression on those by progressing it in different ways than we might do on the competition lift. You can also do things like top sets. That's become very popular, where something like a dip or pull up you can do, or even an RDL, you can do like a heavy set of 5 and then do back off sets with 10. That can also be a great way to make progress and have more fun because you're almost treating like a main lift, right, in terms of giving it that top set. So lots of different ways you can progress it, but the important part is that you are progressing them and that you are making effort to keep progressing over not only just the block but multiple blocks, right? Because if you just go in and do your punch card and just put in minimal effort and you always do the same weight, you're not going to be getting any progress, right? You're just going to be stagnant. So always trying to progress your accessories just like your competition list. Not at the same rate, but still always going with the intent of I'm trying to do more than last time is really, really important for your accessories. And then one of the last topics I want to touch on is finding the right accessory for you. So there's lots of different ways you can do like different movements, right? There's lots of ways you can do curls or your quadriceps, glutes, hamstrings, chest, triceps, right? And it's important that you find ones that feel good to you that you can make progress on. There's different camps of like how you should be doing your cable, like your accessory, whether it should be cable or machine or dumbbell, right? Or like you need these very specific niche setups, or should you just stick to the basics? My thing is do whatever feels the best to you and whatever is going to get you excited to do them, because a lot of times a lot of people just skip them because they don't want to do them. And so if it's something that you don't want to do because you're not excited about it, find an accessory that works that muscle group but that you get excited about, that you want to do, because that'll be infinitely more valuable because you're actually going to want to push it and go hard on it and try to make progress. It's more important to be consistent, push hard, and make progress on whatever accessory you choose than it is to be super nuanced to pick the most scientific one that you don't actually like doing, that takes you forever to set up and you don't even feel very well. So keep that in mind when you're picking the exercises. It does, as long as it's working the muscle that you want it to work and you enjoy it and you can progress it, then it's going to be a good accessory for you for the most part. And then when it comes to the picking out which accessories you should do, it boils down a lot to, are you trying to do more additional volume or just trying to do more hypertrophy, right? And so if you want to do a little bit of both, like the more compound the accessory is, the more it will act like additional volume as well as hypertrophy, versus the more single joint it is, the more it's just going to act like hypertrophy, which they are both very useful in their own right, because one of them is easier to recover from and the other one is harder to recover from. So it's important to know when to use those within the program. Some of my favorite ones are actually just, some of my favorite accessories program are actually just single joint exercises for the muscle group. So like for squat, I love a good leg extension or a leg press and a leg curl, like very basic, but they're not very, sport specific, but they're easy to hop on. You can put a lot of effort into them. They're on a machine, right? So you don't have to balance or stabilize, and you can just go really hard into the machine and get a lot out of it. Same thing for bench press. I really like a cable fly and a tricep push down, or any type of tricep, like overhead cable push down, cable flies, or pec deck, something like that. Anything where we can just like individually build up the muscles of the main movements, I think are really, really valuable and maybe even underrated for just getting athletes more generally jacked. And I also think it can be useful to not always even have your accessories be something that are so close to the main lift. I think accessories are a great way to get away from those same movement patterns, work in a different variety of way, and really focus on making sure we're getting the best hypertrophy out of the muscle and working it in the way it needs to be worked, instead of just doing the same squat, bench, deadlift patterns over and over again. And then for a deadlift, a good leg curl, and also a controversial pick would be something like a hip thrust. I think doing direct glute work can help a lot, and I think is very, very overrated. So I do program a lot of hip thrusts. I do think they're very useful because you get to work the glute, and I think the people, especially sumo pullers, underestimate how much their glute actually does. And so I think there's room to improve there for sure. So leg extension, leg curl, hip thrusts, leg press, cable flies, tricep push downs, I think they're all great builders that are underrated and focus on just the muscle, not the movement itself. All right, so someone's outside starting to do construction, so I think this is a good time to wrap this up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well. Comment down below what your favorite accessories are. I would love to know. And as well, if you want to pick up some Good Lift apparel, make sure to use that link below to grab some apparel. It's very, very comfortable. Thank you all for watching. I'll talk to you next time. Peace.